What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. So, with Tuesdays being our day to run over DC Rebirth related content, what I want to do here is I want to start by going over the first story arc of Harley Quinn, which is basically Harley Quinn versus zombies on Coney Island. Now, for those of you guys who are very familiar with DC Rebirth, bear with me while I run over this for those who are not. So, if you're relatively new to DC Comics, whether you're coming from like Valiant Comics or Image Comics or Marvel or whatever the case may be, DC Rebirth was not a true reboot. Instead, the idea was to basically continue what was working in the New 52 and fix what was not working in the New 52 by replacing it with things from before the New 52. Now, with Harley Quinn as a character, she's really kind of a mixed bag here. And the reason why I say that is, of course, as we know, she had her roots in Batman the Animated Series, is where she first showed up. But following this original appearance going forward, she was really popular among fans, but she had always been a sidekick of the Joker. You know, before the New 52, leading up to the New 52, when people thought of the Joker, they thought of Harley Quinn. When people thought of Harley Quinn, they thought of the Joker. The two went hand in hand. Now, it did make for some really good storytelling, and some of the best Harley Quinn stories you'll find when she was operating alongside the Joker. The idea was Scott Snyder had his own intention to make the Joker much darker, to make him far more grittier, and there was really no room for a sidekick in terms of Harley Quinn as we knew her in being goofy and bubbly and silly and ditzy. It would require her to be much darker. Now, that did happen in those line of stories, but the idea here was that under the writing of Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti, Harley Quinn was effectively going to be transformed into this character that could hold her own, that could basically operate outside of the influence of the Joker. Now, this is where the rift of Harley Quinn resides. When it comes to her character, either you love Harley Quinn or you hate Harley Quinn. There really is no in between. There really aren't people who are just kind of like, well, I like Harley Quinn occasionally. It depends on the story. Because of the nature of how she's written, either you like her or you don't like her. Now, among those people who do like Harley Quinn, even their community is split between people who preferred her when she's alongside the Joker versus people who like her in this current line of stories where she's an individual. Now, in terms of this aspect of Poison Ivy, this is actually a long-running theme in the life of Harley Quinn and her publications. There was a point whereby DC introduced Harley Quinn as part of a group called the Sirens, which was basically Harley Quinn, Catwoman, and Poison Ivy. But under the current, under all the adventures that Harley Quinn had, it always seemed like there was something between Poison Ivy and Harley that Harley just didn't have with anybody else. The relationship between the two of them seemed to go beyond friendship. And this was never really anything that DC acknowledged until about 2015. And then DC finally came out and they said, yes, Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy are in a relationship. Now, us as the reader, we knew this was coming. Like, for those of us who were reading Harley Quinn comics, we knew that was the case, right? I mean, those of you guys who were reading it, you know, when I was reading it, we all knew that Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy were together. It was just a matter of DC making it official. And when they did, it basically kind of opened the floodgates. You know, it allowed Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti to begin taking a few more liberties in terms of how the two, connected and, talked to one another. Now, they weren't crude with their indications here. You know, what they gave us in terms of their display of friendship was maybe the occasional kiss, but for the most part, it was just the two of them spending time together the way people normally do in relationships, talking about things that bother them and so on and so forth and working through their problems. But one of the coolest aspects here when it came to Harley Quinn in the New 52 was that because Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti wanted to beef her up, they basically started bolstering her supporting characters, is the best way to say it. And what they said was that at some point along the line, she had dealt with a patient prior to becoming Harley Quinn, and when that patient died, that patient bequeathed everything that they seemed to own to Harley Quinn, a building with tenants and so on and so forth. And so it basically gave Harley Quinn a base of operations to operate out of in Coney Island. From there, we saw characters like Big Tony and so on and so forth, and the revolving cast just kind of got bigger and bigger. We got Harley Quinn's Gang of Harleys, which was basically where she came to realize that with Coney Island, that Brooklyn area kind of being her own little segment, that she needed to ensure that she could hold it on her own. The problem was that she couldn't do it by herself, and so what she literally did was just send out an SOS to anybody who wanted to be part of her gang. And because there were so many people, she turned off the lights in a room, let them all kill each other, and whoever was left would be the ones that would be able to be part of her gang. It was just kind of this mixed bag thing, and that's one of the cool things about what Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti do here, is that because the DC Rebirth line of stories were supposed to be a refresher, at least the first arcs were, they basically give us this refreshment. And this is where Harley Quinn differs. With Nightwing, with Batman, with, Justice League, Wonder Woman, all that kind of stuff, they all got rebirth issues. They all got issues that basically retold their origin stories. With Harley Quinn, she didn't really get that. Instead, it was just this issue number 1 and we're off to the races. And the reason why this was done was really because Harley Quinn's such a huge mainstay that you don't really need that. I mean, her story was so popular, they didn't really have to do a rebirth because they weren't fixing anything. With Batman, they had to do a rebirth because they had to let people know that the direction the Batman stories were going in was not going to be the same as Scott Snyder. Justice League, they had to let people know that the Justice League titles are not going to be the same as Jeff Johns' run. And even then, the events of Darkseid War were not going to roll over into the new line of publications. With Aquaman, you know, with all these different characters, it was the exact same thing. But because Harley Quinn was so popular, we more or less just kind of continue on. Now, there is a break here. You know, there is a difference between issue number 30, which was the last issue of her previous volume before DC Rebirth, and issue number 1 right now. But the fact remains here that we're given this exposition. You know, we're told that Harley Quinn was at one point a graduate of Gotham University, that she had engaged in studies on the criminal mind as part of psychology. She eventually made herself a criminal in Arkham Asylum in order to go undercover and interview various criminals. The Joker got the better of her, tricked her into becoming a villain, and she ended up as the Harley Quinn that we all know. Now, she does give us kind of a rundown of her various sidekicks here and there, but again, aside from knowing that they're just there to kind of bolster her role within Coney Island, we don't really need to know a whole lot about this. But somebody that I do want to point out here is a character by the name of Red Tool. Now, for those of you guys who are relatively new to Harley Quinn's comics, so that's to say, maybe you started with the New 52 and you never really read anything before that, you probably would have noticed a lot of similarities between Harley Quinn and Deadpool, not in the sense that the two of them are identical characters, but in the sense of how Harley Quinn relates to her environment, how silly she can be. The character of Red Tool was basically designed to be a parody of Deadpool. And this is ironic because Deadpool is a parody of Deathstroke, which means that DC is effectively making a parody of itself. If Deathstroke was created as a villain of the Teen Titans, Deadpool was created to parody Deathstroke, and now Red Tool is created to parody Deadpool. So it's really just one of these funny cycles. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say that Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti are trying to make some grandiose point here, so much as they're just kind of going with the flow and following the line of Harley Quinn comics, but I think they also recognize the popularity of Deadpool. You know, Deadpool's kind of a pop culture icon. People who don't even read his comics know who he is, just because he is so popular. But the fact remains here that we end up picking up, you know, outside of Coney Island in Oklahoma with the crash landing of an alien ship. Now, on its surface, when I was going through this comic, I just kind of chalked this up to the fact that it's just a Harley Quinn story, and sometimes things just come out of left field and they don't make sense to anybody except Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti. But this actually ends up making sense here. What happens is this alien arrives, and when it lands on the farm, it assumes that this cow is the dominant form of life. But because of the fact that it sees people, it doesn't quite know how to interpret them, and so the alien basically blends in by transforming itself into a cow. The problem with this is that once it basically kind of operates undercover, so to speak, you know, to figure out whether or not these humans are good or they're bad, it's taken to a slaughterhouse and it's killed. And so once it's killed, it's basically turned into hot dogs and it's sent to Coney Island. And so, of course, you know, with this circumstance being what it is, the most logical situation unfolds and zombies actually just begin to emerge all over the place in Coney Island. Now, from here, the story, you know, unfolds much as we would expect it to, in the sense that there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of jokes being made, so on and so forth. And this is really one of the reasons why Harley Quinn is kind of a mixed bag, in the sense that people like her, people don't like her. With Harley Quinn, there's not a lot of detailed storytelling because Harley Quinn's not meant to be that way. You don't really sit down and read Harley Quinn for the purpose of some super in-depth monologue, you know, for a greater understanding of the DC universe. You know, it's not a philosophical line of stories. They're literally just designed to be fun. And this is exactly what happens. Of course, when these zombies begin going through and attacking everybody, Harley Quinn and her various supporting characters, Red Tool, so on and so forth, Big Tony, they all basically just do what they can to fend these zombies off. But in the midst of this, Red Tool is suddenly attacked by a zombie. Now, when this happens, Harley Quinn immediately takes a sword and cuts his arm off. And the response of Red Tool is, "Why in God's name did you do this?" And Harley Quinn says that she had actually figured out what was going on, that there's something basically in the hot dogs, or at least she seemed to pick up on it from a Red Tool statement that whenever people are bitten, that they seem to become zombies and the infection seems to spread. But the idea here is that for Harley Quinn, because it all seems to root with the hot dogs themselves, that by cutting his arm off, she's effectively saved Red Tool from infection. The issue here is that they also need to get him to safety so that he can, you know, have his arm reattached, or at the very least, be cured of what this infection seems to be, so they can figure out what's going on. The problem with this is that they can't get to a hospital by going out there and being attacked by zombies. And so Harley Quinn, in her infinite wisdom, decides that the best thing they can do is strap Red Tool to a catapult and just send him off to a hospital, which is actually pretty genius. And this is one of the reasons why I like these Harley Quinn stories. When I sit down and I read DC Comics, you know, I read Batman, Batman, I read Detective Comics, I read, Superman, Trinity, Wonder Woman, Aquaman. You get really serious stories. With Harley Quinn, it's really fun to just kind of sit down and just let all that go and just kind of laugh at some silly notions, some silly ideas. And so again, because of everything that's going on here, of course, they're monitoring Red Tool as he's being shot into the hospital. He does arrive once he comes crashing through the window of the food court, but when he's there, their attention immediately turns to, okay, fine, he's in the hospital now. Let's start focusing on, at the very least, how to survive this insane pandemic. Now, when the police show up, which of course we would expect them to, when they start appearing with riot gear with the intention of trying to take out these various people, we also learn that because of the fact that this is a substance that's the result of an alien being turned into hot dogs, it can be consumed by anything, basically. And so what happens is birds have apparently eaten some of these hot dogs that have been thrown into the trash or whatever the case may be. And because of that, the birds begin attacking people, spreading the infection even further. And so because of this, it seems like the entire, Coney Island area is descending into absolute madness. And so Harley Quinn does exactly what it is that she always does, and she basically leaps into action and again continues this path, cutting a swath through all these different forces. But one of the funny things about this too is that Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti also pay attention to the small things. And when you have funny stories, it's very easy to miss this. It's very easy to miss the very small things that make the difference between a genuinely funny story and stories that are just kind of out there and a little too strange. With Harley Quinn, she has to go to the bathroom. And this is one of the cool things, because with her having to go to the bathroom, when she gets to the restroom, she finds the entire thing filled with zombies. And so while she's in the middle of killing all these zombies, while she and her supporting cast are fighting them off, she keeps commenting about how she really has to go pee. And that's why I like this. That's why I like these things, because it really serves the purpose that Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti were going for when it was giving Harley Quinn character, evolving her character beyond just some, ditzy assistant to the Joker, and giving her a motive for us as readers to really fall in love with her as a character, to really look at her and say, she is amazing in and of herself in terms of her storytelling, in terms of the events that unfold, and so on and so forth. And so what they do is, while they're at least seem to be backed into a corner and preparing for the end of their lives, suddenly Poison Ivy emerges. Now again, I don't know whether you guys had caught it or not, hopefully my editor put it in there, but there was a segment whereby with Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy hanging out and talking to each other, that because they were spending time in a relationship, they were more or less spending the day with one another, after which Poison Ivy went back to Gotham City and Harley Quinn, stayed in Coney Island to sort of get things or go back to her normal life here. But with Poison Ivy coming back, the plan here is, okay, because she is effectively Mother Earth, more or less, in DC Comics, the idea here is to find a way to neutralize this using some plant-based organism, or at the very least synthesize some kind of cure using a plant-based organism. But what we do is we actually end up jumping back to Red Tool, and this is one of the things that I love the most. I love this part of the story so much. This is so cool. We switch back to Red Tool after he arrived in the hospital, and because his arm was severed, the doctors immediately know that his arm needs to be reattached. Most likely this infection has already been purified. This is one of those things that Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti don't worry about. They just kind of skip over it, which is fine. It's not the biggest deal in the world. The concept here is, if his arm's going to be attached, then what happens next? But what ends up happening here is that because of the fact that his arm was severed, it's most likely just not going to be able to be reconnected. And so as a result of this, once he wakes up, once he comes to with his arm reconnected, we learn that it's not actually Red Tool's arm. Instead, this arm belonged to a guy by the name of Chronic. Now, Red Tool hears this and he immediately freaks out. And my thought is, well, maybe Chronic will possess him, maybe Chronic will take over his body or something like that. Nope, that's not what happened. What we learn is that Chronic was just, pardon my language, some crazy asshole who was running around observing women who were in changing rooms and doing inappropriate things while watching that happen. And so the idea from Red Tool is he's literally wearing the arm of a guy who was caught touching himself to women. And so Red Tool flips, like he absolutely loses it. And he was like, I do not want this arm on me. I do not want the hand of a guy who was touching himself in public. And he's told by the doctor that the Chronic was a lefty and that Red Tool got his right arm. And so it's not the same hand, everything's fine. And so Red Tool begins to calm down. He begins to relax. And of course the nurse thanks the doctor and says, good thing that the Chronic was a lefty, in which case the doctor says, yeah, whatever, indicating that Red Tool actually does have the Chronic's arm. He does have the Chronic's hand. Whether anything happens to that I don't know. But again, it's just the small things. It's those little funny moments like that I thought was absolutely hilarious. But what we end up doing here is we also pick up with the family of the alien that had traveled to Earth. And this again is kind of interesting here because the family was under the impression that their alien son was going to go spend time with his friends. But because of the fact that when they called, this friend's house, when that mother picked up, they said, no, your son's not here. And so their initial concern is, well, maybe he left the galaxy. And this is again, is just kind of a big, huge galactic version of when you lie to your parents and say, oh, I'm going to go to a friend's house, but you actually go somewhere else. That's basically what this is. But the idea is that they begin the hunt for searching for their child. They began the hunt trying to find their child and where it was that their kid went to. And so from here, we jump back to the hideout of Harley Quinn and her supporting cast while they try to figure out what to do next. The problem with this is that Harley Quinn is starting to get hungry. Now, for those of you guys who are familiar with Harley Quinn stories, I don't need to tell you, when she starts to get hungry, dangerous things happen if that hunger is not assuaged. And this is exactly what happens. Harley Quinn begins pondering eating one of her supporting cast, but they end up deciding that if they're gonna get out of there, then they're gonna have to find a way to end this, and they're gonna have to travel to some tunnels and some pretty unsavory places that seems to belong to a woman named Madame McCaber's, wax museum, which apparently has ties to mysticism and darkness and so on and so forth. And so what they do is while they're undergoing this journey and they're traveling to this underground passage, while they're traveling to this room that seems to be involved with all these forms of darkness, what we end up finding out here is that the aliens have basically arrived on Earth. And as they start traveling through Earth and they try to locate their child, they come to realize that their child is actually in pieces. There's hundreds of their child, and the husband basically realizes that their child's been turned into hot dogs and has been consumed by hundreds of people and has been transformed into a zombie. Now, the reason why I found this funny was because I could only imagine, I really couldn't imagine that, I guess. I could imagine being an alien and discovering that your child has been turned into hot dogs and consumed by people. That's just so far out and left field, I can't even begin to imagine where the idea for this plot came from. But in any event, the aliens seem to have the ability to reconstitute their child, because what they do is they begin taking the remains of their child, which has been all chewed up, and they start pulling it out of the bodies of these different zombies, these different people. And as a result, while these individuals do seem to die in the process, the fact remains that the entire zombie infection has basically gone away. And so what this does is allow for things to go into a rebuilding phase, whereby Coney Island is kind of restored after all the pandemonium. And so Big Tony and Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn sort of enjoy the end of this event by spending time with one another, as well as eating a whole bunch of French fries, allowing Harley Quinn to assuage her hunger. So I'm hoping by the end of this, I'm hoping that with this video done, you'll have an understanding of why Harley Quinn's really hit and miss. I love this story. I thought it was hilarious, but you may very well look at it and say, this was terrible. I have no idea, it's really a mixed bag, but if you guys enjoyed this story, feel free to post a comment down below. If you guys didn't really care for this story, feel free to post a comment down below. Please try not to insult each other. I'd ask that question, ask people to post their comments in a few previous videos, and there was somebody who was resorting to insulting people with profanity, using terrible names, telling people they were stupid because, their opinion was different, and that person's been banned. I have no problem with you guys voicing how you view comics, whether or not you like them, but try to keep it civil and do not insult each other because somebody's opinion is different from your own. I have full faith that you guys can make your opinions known without resorting to insults. But with that being said, if you guys are new here to the Rob Corps, feel free to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button to join the Rob Corps. Yes, bolster all members. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.